Hey, good afternoon, everyone. It's Lilia from Peel Scotland, and good morning to Adam Mandel. And where are you now? Is it Toronto or you?
Nope, Manitoba, Canada, 2 hours north
Oh,
of Winnipeg.
oh, wow, wow, wow. So is it cold with you guys right now?
Normally, it should be. Normally, this time of the year, we're usually at in between -30 and -40. This has been a very aberrant year, and so the temperatures have been lovely, just slightly below zero. And today, in fact, it's above. So very little snow on the ground, and I'm not complaining. Lots of people with the snowmobiles and the snow machines, they're missing the snow in the cold winter. Not me. I'm enjoying it. It's been great.
Yeah, it seems all over that you just really can't guarantee what kind of weather. My brother,
Yeah,
he's in near Calgary, so we know
and of
these
course,
temperatures.
that's always an interesting conversation in and of itself. Rabbit holes everywhere in regards to everything these days, it would seem.
Yeah. Now, listen, Adam, you've got so many, there's like most people that I talk to, so many strings to your bow, but really, I think what's happening now is this energy medicine. People are actually starting to understand working on the energy field. And obviously, your business, Quantum Clarity, really is a leader. I mean, you're a practitioner, you're a teacher, you're working with world class athletes. And I do believe you're even actually taking part in the building of these things.
Mm-hmm.
Coding is that I don't know what the terminology is. So can you start off just by telling us how did you get into this?
Wow. Okay. So, of course, my name is Adam Mandel. I have been working in complementary and supportive wellness for, I guess, almost 25 years now. And interestingly enough, I heard about the biofeedback device whilst I was living in China studying Chinese medicine. And uh, a relative had purchased one of these crazy boxes that had the ability to scan me from Canada. At the time, I was living in China. So from Canada to China with nothing but my name, date of birth, and where I was born as information, and a picture of myself. And I thought, how is this even remotely possible? It must be malarkey. And um, she proceeded, and I had never met this person. It was actually a relative of my ex-wife's, and I'd never met her. She knew nothing of me. We'd never even had a conversation. My ex-wife gave her aunt my information, so she said she was going to test me. I said, sure, whatever. And sure enough, the next day, she came back and told me, having tested me on her device and worked on me therapeutically, what she saw. So at the time, for about a month and a half, I had been suffering, and I choose that word consciously. I had been suffering with a frozen neck. My head was frozen like this, couldn't move my head. I saw acupuncturists in China. I saw what is the equivalent of a chiropractor in China, and nobody could unfreeze my neck. I did not tell to the practitioner, to my ex's aunt, that I had a neck problem. Nothing. And so she proceeded to, as I said, work on me and scan me. And came back the next day and said, look, do you have a neck problem? And I said, yes, absolutely. She said, well, your gallbladder meridian is totally frozen and shut down. And everything that I can see in the device traces it directly to MSG toxicity. So living in China, MSG is, of course, prevalent in virtually every food that you could possibly eat. I'd been living there for about 9 months at the time, and I'm sure I became quite toxic. So she proceeded to work on me for whatever that meant. And the next day I woke up, I had full range of motion in my neck. I'd had the best sleep that I had had in years. And I felt better. So I had no idea how any of this was possible. And at the time, we were pregnant with our first child, and I literally took every dime that we had, said, I don't know what this thing is, but I know we need to do that. And
Yeah.
so 25 years later, here I am. having now worked primarily in practice with quantum biofeedback now for the better part of 20 plus years. And it's been an extraordinary journey, one that if I guess we will be talking about somewhat on this podcast, but one that if I were to have foreseen upon the purchase of the device, I would have been told by my peers, colleagues, and anybody around with the intention of what I was going to do, I would have been called quite crazy, as it has been a pretty extraordinary journey. So that's the introduction story, me in a nutshell.
Right, awesome. So that yeah, so can you now, I mean, because I mean I've actually been called a quack, which I quite like actually. But
Me too.
can you maybe because I first heard about the machine probably about 25, 30 years ago as well, but at that stage in time it was financially way out my grasp. And it
Mhm.
only kind of came back into my awareness through Stuart actually and Anya. And that's why I was like, oh my God. And I was obsessed, just like from at 5 in the morning, I was waking up and getting on the machine. I just couldn't believe, that this was available. Now, can
Yeah.
you explain? And I know, like, if I say to people we can do it, virtually, that can be, if you don't have any kind of overview of the quantum, nature of the world, how do you explain it to somebody kind of in layman's terms so that they can understand it? It's basically what I love about it, obviously, it's your body. It's not me looking at you and making guesses, although clearly you know what you can read and you can make sort of very educated assumptions. But in general, it's the therapist sort of out the way. It's your body is feeding back that information to the software, isn't it?
It is. And so the question is, what's happening? What's that interaction? How is that working?
Uh-huh.
And of course, having done this for 25 years, I can answer that question and relatively easy, but or relatively easily. I mean, that's in and of itself complex. But what I'll say is this: so if we start back throughout our recorded history, um, we have the documentation of a phenomena known as prayer and the effect of prayer in regards to people's healing. So, statistically, if we were to look at, for example, the experience of prayer and or what often some people define as miracles, which associate in and around prayer, if we look, there's a statistical aberration there that shows that there is clearly a cause and effect. And I mean, again, going back 5,000 years in recorded history, we've certainly documented the effects of prayer, and that there most certainly is something that happens when we pray and we focus our consciousness and our attention towards an outcome. It doesn't necessarily mean we always get what we want, but certainly there is an effect that happens when we pray. So as we progress from early recorded history to current science and technology, we've come to understand principles of things in science over the last 20, 30 years of the quantum realm, principles of quantum entanglement, meaning everything uh, everything that we are aware of is connected in consciousness in through something that has been long understood and recently forgotten over the last 20 or 30 or 40 years, but what was known as the ether, something else, and another element which serves as interconnection. Side note, I kind of think it's hydrogen because water is what connects us all always, all the time.
Mhm.
So as a means of interconnection. But there have been many both scientific experiments documenting the effects of quantum entanglement, as well as uh, experiments, as well as phenomena in observation, working with people who do non-local healing, or what I even prefer to call consciousness healing.
Mhm.
Let me paint this in a really clear and easy way to understand. So, um, I want you to close your eyes for a moment, and I want you to think about your father or your mother. Or let's actually progress beyond that, because many people in the audience, perhaps their family members are no longer on the planet. Let's think about your best friend, wherever they are right now. Let's say they're at their office, or they're at their home, they're in their kitchen, they're at the kindergarten dropping the kids off at school. I want you to think about them, and I want you to think about being sitting right next to them. So I'm sure you've already done that. You're sitting right next to your friend, your loved one, etc. And how long did it take for you to be connected to them? How much space was there, or distance did you have to travel in order to be in that chair with them, sitting next to them in the same room? And so therein is one of the clues, which I believe sort of shows and explains and tells us that we are so much more than we think we are. And the level of interconnection that we feel with each other is in fact a phenomena, that phenomena known as quantum entanglement. And through working in that direct level of conscious connection, conscious entanglement with each other and with all things, we have the ability to put focused attention and affect great change.
Yeah, that's a great example, actually. Yeah, fantastic. Thank you for that. So, can you just talk a little bit about the Quest 9, and how, look, I mean, who comes to you? And I mean, I know you get a huge variety of things, and I suppose to some degree we tend to think of people that are sick, but I know you also work on performance as well.
I, I do, and I have, but let's take a you know a further understanding very quickly of the question that you just asked, because it is such a heavy weight. And of course, I took you through an experience there of simply closing your eyes and feeling connected to whomever is your loved one. But I'd like to take that further, because of course I have a very skeptical, analytical mind, much like many of the people which will be currently listening to this live stream. And I'll explain my first time, where there's always the experience of working, or always, for us practitioners, there is the initial experiences of working in what we call subspace, or in non-local or consciousness healing. There is the experience where you're initially working and you're questioning, is this thing working? Does it work? How is this possible? And then you hear feedback from your clients, which is like, oh, I am feeling significantly better. Is that happenstance? Is it psychological, the shift there? Is it psychosoma? Is it the placebo effect invoked, which another word for the placebo effect could be considered the biology of belief? These things all challenged my mind as I began to approach working with this kind of technology. And I really needed to understand the cause and effect, and also to be in my integrity when presenting this to people, that in fact, this is not malarkey. And there's something pretty observable and amazing here. So the first time I challenged this principle as a means of being able to sort of look behind the curtain and understand, uh, interestingly enough, was at about 2 o'clock in the morning in Dubai, United Arab Emirates. Myself and a team had flown out, and what we were doing was actually working with a very prominent sheikh in the area, who was very invested, interested in camel racing, which is surprisingly a very big thing in the Middle East. None of us would ever know about it. And there's a huge conversation about that, which is really interesting, but camel racing. And it was a super interesting story, because as my team from Vancouver at the time flew out to Dubai, looking for our microscopist within our community, was a challenge. And then once we found one, the microscopist that we found was very intimidated, because he'd never looked at camel blood under the microscope before. So, he went out, he bought himself a big book about camel blood. Amazingly, that somebody produced a book about camel blood, but he found a big book about camel blood, and he was a very quirky, interesting Frenchman from Quebec, and a little neurotic, a little insecure. So 2 days before we left for the trip, we get a phone call, and he's saying, I am not wanting to go on the trip. I am afraid of, I don't know if I know enough, right? That's my very poor French accent. And he drove home that day into his backyard after calling us. And sure enough, in Surrey, British Columbia, just outside of Vancouver, he went into his bath. He was looking literally out his kitchen window in his backyard. And behind the fence in his backyard, there was a camel in
No.
Vancouver. Like, what are the odds, right? What are the odds? I swear to God. And so apparently, and this is crazy. Apparently, they were filming a movie in the field behind his yard, and so this was a movie camel in the movie. And so he gets very excited. He sees the camel. He runs out and he goes and finds the trainer, and he's like, "Hello, I see you have the camel. I am going to Dubai to do experiments on camel blood. Can I have some of your camel blood?" Of course, the trainer was right freaked out by this very odd Frenchman asking for camel blood. So he got on the phone, called our office to confirm, in fact, that we were going to Dubai to take blood and look at blood under a microscope of the camel, at which point we appeased and eased his mind, explaining, look, yes, he is joining us on this trip and everything is okay. So the man agreed and enabled Jean-Pierre to get his blood sample from the camel, which created the next problem, because if you know anything about live blood analysis and dark field blood, what you need is peripheral blood. Well, the difficulty with a camel is they have hair all over their body. So where are you going to be able to get at a clean sample of blood without the camel fur everywhere, right? Which would contaminate the blood. And so sure enough, the only place on a camel in which there is no hair is in fact his butthole. And so Jean-Pierre ended up having to prick the butthole of the camel to get the blood sample, and he was very pleased. We got our blood sample. He looked at camel blood. He was ready and prepared. So now, a week later, we're in the middle of the desert. It's 2:00 in the morning, and the experiment that we're doing is an experiment about subspace. This particular sheikh wanted to see that, in fact, during competition, we could actually be working on and supporting the animals while they were running the race. And so the purpose of the experiment was to prove the effects of non-local or subspace, the effects of the device, and in fact display that these we could measure and demonstrate the effects directly. And so what we did was we were out there at 2:00 in the morning. The reason it was 2:00 in the morning is because it's so bloody hot that it's the only time you can be out in the empty quarter somewhat comfortably. I think it was still 52 or 53 degrees at 2:00 in the morning. And we got out there and we went and, of course, tried to take the blood sample from the camel. So the problem this time was this was not a pleasant movie camel pampered underneath a tent and such. This was a camel living in the desert of Dubai. So therefore, the pricker that our microscopist brought would not pierce the skin of the butthole of the camel, at which point we sat there quite perplexed for a while. The trainer who was working with said camel had a razor blade and sliced the butthole slightly, got us our blood sample, and we were in business. Besides the fact that for whatever reason, maybe we plugged the extension cord into the wrong port on the generator, because of course we're in the middle of the desert, there is no power. We had to power the microscope and the projector, and we were projecting the image on the side of the van that we drove out there. Well, after the fire was put out and we managed to continue forward, the next problem was the projector was going out every minute or two because it was overheating. Sure enough, we managed to get all the problems sorted. We had the camel hooked up to the biofeedback in an animal harness, which actually works with the device, a special program specific for animals. But he was physically hooked up to the device. We had the blood sample 15 feet away underneath the microscope. And so as we started doing therapy on the camel who was hooked up to the device, what was amazing was that the blood underneath the microscope was changing in real time. You could see the effects of what we were doing therapeutically, and the characteristics of the blood vastly changed. We saw where blood was sticking together beginning to separate. We saw the motility of the blood under the slide vastly increase, as well as the motility and the movement of the white blood cells. So it was very pronounced. It was very obvious. And we ended up selling, I believe, like 10 devices to that particular shake at 2 o'clock in the morning, in the middle of the empty quarter in the United Arab Emirates. So that was like one of the first times I put that to the test under the microscope. And then over the years, I've since in different demonstrations, etc., repeated that experiment with people even not hooked up to the device. So there was no physical hookup, but you could still see the blood change. And so you have to ask yourself why. And the answer is because that blood still carries the same resonant frequency as that person, which is essentially like the person's telephone number if you were to call them on a cell phone. So I just wanted to finish that point to enable people to have a better grasp of the fact that this is, in fact, although it seems outside the purview of what we understand to be real and or possible, it is something that, again, I've spent 25 years now working with, and having done so at the highest level of possibility, working with the 2008 Chinese national team during the Beijing Olympics, up to and through the Olympics for about 4 or 5 months was that project. And then we worked on every minister and vice minister and central government in China, much of that work being supportive of their stress levels from a distance. So not to color it as though this is solely the focus of the device, because again, we also hook people up to this system in a harness which connects via the headband, wristbands, and ankle bands, and is most often the preferable methodology of usage. However, in sports, in competition, like with camels, like with professional athletes in sport, there's always wonderful opportunities to be able to use this additional function of the device that enables us to be quite limitless and work on anyone from anywhere, which is pretty amazing. So hopefully that expanded. Now, where did you want to take the conversation? I'm sorry.
Well, I'm just saying, you're in Manitoba and I'm in Argyll, Scotland, and people all over the world can watch us having this conversation, and we just accept that at face value. And you can jump on your phone right now, as can I, and I could talk to somebody else. So, it's obvious that there's lines of communication, whatever form they take. I think
I
it's
think I think our nature is to be like, well, that's this, but again, and to be like in acceptance of a technology that we've applied and used and know to work. However, if it were to be presented to you, for example, the smartphone, if I were to say to you in 1980 that we were going to be able to have, a video conversation between Scotland and here, it would be virtually instant, and and it clearly has an effect. I can say things that will make you angry. I can say things that will make you happy. And so there is a measurable physiological effect, even from this level of communication. So what we work with is just that much more extraordinary.
Yeah, absolutely. So could you just talk a little bit about like how a session looks, and because we're really primarily taking the stress or finding out where the stress is. And the other thing I would like to ask you is how much compliance do you expect and get from your clients?
Well, I think the first thing we have to do for most people is break down the word stress. A lot of people hear stress and they think about the argument that they had with their spouse, or they think about the problems that they're having with work, or the problems with the kids. And, those are all different emotional forms of stress. I think one of the things that goes often misunderstood, however, is what physiological stress is beyond mental stress. And so let's open up the idea or the understanding of the word stress a little bit more, and then we can dive into it as far as how do we approach that in practice. So Stress, of course, is emotional and mental. The mental stress of thinking, anticipating, projecting in a big way. The emotional stress of the things that are happening within our environment, which, you know, uh, uh, have an effect on our well-being. Of course, that is another form of stress. And there are physiological things that we can measure as we have those responses to stress, like increase in cortisol levels, increase in adrenalines, decreases in serotonins and dopamines, etc. So there are measurable physiological reactions to stress that the body has, of which we are aware and of which is not contested. So then the other major part of stress that often goes misunderstood by the public is the stress of toxicity and the stress of deficiency. So when our bodies are not amply nourished through the likes of the food that we're eating, because we're eating too many processed foods, we're eating too many sugars, we're not managing to get the nutrition from what we need, then at the cellular level within our body, our cells become depleted, from minerals and vitamins to enzymes and fatty acids, and amino acids. All of these are the building blocks of our body towards being healthy, vibrant individuals. And of course, stress has direct effect on all of those. So deficiency on our body creates a physiological stress in that the body's not able to properly rebuild and regenerate itself. Toxicity is another factor which puts a great deal of stress and burden on the body, whereby, again, going back to those processed foods and a lot of the things in our cultures which um, have toxic effects: smoking, drinking, bad diet, consuming of dairy and sugars, and chemicals and solvents and metals, all the different things that we are environmentally exposed to, which further put strain and stress on our physical bodies. So, being aware of the effects of physiological stress, of deficiency and toxicity, is so imperative, in tandem with understanding the mental and the emotional stress, as well as even the spiritual stress. I really tie into that. And how do you break down spiritual stress? I don't know. I break it down that every life has a sense of purpose. And in that sense of purpose, if we're on, to me, that's the higher self, the spirit, the
Mhm.
purpose of the spirit in this incarnation, in this experience, and what it's going through and learning and growing and evolving. So, often, for example, a lot of depressions, I believe, are often fueled at the level of spiritual stress. There's not often, a direct acute mental or emotional catalyst any different than is their general environment. However, at the spiritual level, something else is supposed to be happening that isn't happening, most often as a byproduct of fear. And so, that's another component of things that we have to think about. So, with the device, how does that interact and how does it exchange? So, our device operates uh, in a really amazing way. Ultimately, the conversation in consciousness in biofeedback is initially the body's presented to a database matrix of 13,000, I think, plus frequencies at this point, where the body is stimulated. So we prick you and we measure the ouch. Did that hurt? Did that not hurt? And we stimulate you and we measure the reaction to 13,000 frequencies in the span of between 3 and 5 minutes. And in that, the body then can itemize, this is aberrant, this is, there is no reaction to this, etc. And then as we look at the reaction to all of those items, we have the ability to sort of begin to really see the story of stress, the story of anger and frustration, the story of solvents and toxins causing, for example, depression in the liver. And we end up in these perpetual cycles within specific organ stress. The liver is always an easy one to talk about, solely because the emotion is so prevalent in our culture. But your liver is the produces the emotion of anger. So when our livers are toxic and congested and not able to process and clean our blood and produce healthy blood and manage the toxicity of the body, then that toxicity accumulates. as that liver gets more and more toxic and more congested, there's a physiological or an emotional effect. It can prompt an emotional effect where, that person is angry and quicker to frustration. So everything that our device measures as an area of interest or aberration as it runs its testing process has the ability to then be fed back as a frequency to the body to stimulate the body into releasing stress, to releasing things like the toxicity that are causing stress, and support the body in doing exactly what the body is designed to do, which is to heal itself. So we have to ask ourselves at times, if the body is a self-healing device, why does it not have the ability to always heal? Why sometimes do we get ill? And why is the body chronically ill and move into degenerative patterns? And the answer to that is stress. The stress has accumulated at such a degree that the body is unable to do what it's designed to do, which is to regenerate and to heal. And so that's where we come in between working with the energetics, which have the ability to uh, communicate with the body. See, I really don't think that anything that we do with, be it pharmaceutical pills or anything, or even the devices, I don't think any of these things really force the body into doing anything. I think what they do is they signal and they communicate to the body what needs to happen. And certainly, our device with pills, we can stimulate physiological reactions, but with our device, we're working directly with the body, having the ability to influence behavior in the body, to support the body in making changes that would be reducing and releasing stress, enabling it to achieve its homeostasis. So that's what I would say about that. And then what was the second part to your question, Lilia?
So when you're asking your client to make changes to support the machine, to support the frequency work, how do you find do people follow your advice, or do they rely heavily on you?
I guess that's the old adage, right? If you want something different, you're going to have to change.
Mhm.
And I think we are no different. We can support the body. So for example, let's say the average healing time would have taken under the environmental conditions that a person is contending with. Let's say the average healing time, pending the body had healing potential, the average healing time would be, let's say, 6 weeks of whatever our hypothetical catalyst is here. Working with our device, perhaps we have the ability to expedite that healing time down to 3 weeks by reducing the stress, enabling the body unobstructed to circulate blood, to circulate stem cells, to do that which it needs to do to support a regenerative process. So, we most certainly have the ability to support and influence a pattern. However, if the physical patterns of the day-to-day stress aren't altered and or changed, then we are very, very limited in the potential for a paradigm shift in whatever the behavior is that's currently demonstrating and displaying through the body in symptomology, right? And I think that's also the big important part here. Our focus is solely not the reduction of a symptom that may be causing discomfort. We choose to embrace the symptom as a communication from the body saying something here is out of balance. Now, simply because the symptom goes away does not mean the imbalance and or the stress has come into a point of resolution. Most often when symptoms dissipate, it's because there has been a process of adaptation in the body. The body has adapted to the stress. It has increased its stress load in the management of having to operate in tandem with that stress as a variable. And it, by design, works to identify via a pain symptom or whatever the symptom is of an issue, and then it works to restore its state of balance so that we have the ability to just operate and live our lives. However, again, under the means of stress management that the body goes through on its own, in its own natural processes of healing, oftentimes, for example, in this explanation, oftentimes that underlying stress is only adapted to and does not go resolved. And so we have to change a lot of the behaviors that got us into the place of where we find ourselves. Because if we continue with the same toxic behaviors, we're only going to end up in the same place. And
Mhm.
so it's imperative that working with a client and their very specific stress needs, that they take an active role in the change in which they wish to see.
Yeah. And so do you find then working with people over a period of months, that's when you're going to have the, well, hopefully. I think if people come to see you every week, whether it's virtually or in person, there's a bit of a buy-in, isn't there? There's a bit of like, well, I'm going to have to, you know, I'm going to have to be honest about what I've done or what I've not done, which is, I think honesty and transparency is how we kind of move ahead, isn't it?
Well, it is, and there are a couple things that I do to be very supportive of that process. So often when we're working with the biofeedback specifically, the effects therapeutically are not felt because the output of our device is underneath 4 volts. So you can't even feel electricity or energy coming out of the box in, even often if you're in the harness. Certain people whom are very sensitive can, but the average person generally not. So, there's that. I guess one of the biggest fears that everybody has is to feel as though they've been duped or to feel as though they're stupid. And so, people like and often need to see confirmation of the fact that there is a direct cause and effect. And that serves as a reinforcer towards making the lifestyle changes and maintaining the lifestyle changes that they work with. And that's why I often work with additional technologies such as heart rate variability, which has the ability to demonstrate the effects of my biofeedback pre and post session. So I can say and show somebody on a third party device which is not connected to the biofeedback device that I work with. I can measure and get their baseline. Then I'll do everything that I do with the biofeedback, and then post session I can measure again with the HRV and see what has changed in the what I consider to be the uh, foundational measurements of wellness and health as displayed through the likes of HRV. I can see what has changed pre and post session come the end. And of course, when my clients can see that as well and see that there is a direct cause and effect, they are inspired and encouraged to both continue coming back for more therapy with me, but then they're also encouraged to make and maintain the lifestyle choices and changes that we've been advocating together in a session. 50% of the work that we do is very much steeped in education and understanding what are the needs of your body and what are the different things like vitamins, minerals, and herbs that are available to be supportive of the needs of your body. And that's a huge part of what we do. And without that physical component of lifestyle change on behalf of client working with our process, change often just doesn't happen or doesn't happen at a fantastic rate. That isn't to say that over the years I haven't worked with the technology and released 15 years or seen a release of symptoms of 15 years of symptoms in chronic back pain in one session. Like it has most certainly happened. And then, a very similar problem with someone else may take 10 or 15 sessions. And the difference, in that situation, I can only understand and assume to be a blockage of energy in the example of the first client where I released the symptom or was able to support a release of symptom in that first session. Whereas the client that took 10 or 15 sessions, perhaps there was something a little more physical rather than just an energy blockage going on, which of course will require greater work. Personally, and this speaks again to the conversation that we're having, Lilia, I will never see a client for one session. I will never book a client for one session. Anybody that wants to work with me uh, um, is choosing, by the nature of the service I provide, is choosing lifestyle change because they're not working with me without committing to a minimum of 10 sessions.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
as
I
a
can.
practitioner, I need those 10 sessions in order to be able to have enough time and opportunity to begin to change a pattern and re-influence a behavior. The body is a creature of habit, and over a lifetime, it gains lots of bad habits. The purpose of working with us is to train new behaviors and new habits, both in the lifestyle, but then also energetically in what's happening in the body, and to support it and have a conversation saying, hey, it's okay to let this go, to release this stress, and to move forward. And that's a huge part of what we do.
Yeah. No, I think that's very wise, and that's exactly the road I'm going to go down as well. Um, Now you mentioned the HRV there, and I have used the HRV before and after jumping in the river, before and after the amp coil, before and after the neurovisor, before and after the Quest 9. And I mean, I think in terms of giving people protocols or, things that they can do at home, they can really see this is what's happening here. Look at the difference in your system. So I'm going to get you to explain a little bit about the HRV, but I really feel that that helps people to understand. You're kind of retraining the body, and you don't get your bicep pumped up in one weight lifting session. It's that repetition until the body's like, okay, this is how we're doing it now. This is how we're doing it now. Especially taking people from the adrenal response, which is a huge issue right now.
So heart rate variability is a very unique technology, and it's lovely to see. I've been working with it now for well over 12 years, and it has become very much part of our mainstream. Heart
Mhm.
rate variability devices are, very basic heart rate variability devices are built into your iPhone now. And
Yes.
your iPhone app has the ability to do HRV assessments, and there's other different little wearables that can show you heart rate variability assessments. And so it's becoming very, very common, including being used now in part in our hospital system. So what is it? First of all, heart rate variability is the measurement of the communication between your heart and your brain. And why is that important? Because those two areas of the body, I'll say, or I guess we could say organs, those two organs harbor influence over every other organ within the body. So, especially the autonomic nervous system, which is primarily your endocrine system, your pituitary, pineal, hypothalamus, thyroid, and adrenals. They manage the stress of your internal and external environment. So if your liver needs a little more blood flow in order to do whatever it's processing, that's a communication that goes up to the brain or into the heart, and the body then responds, says this is what's needed, and then that's what happens in that area. So essentially it's like the master control system of your body, your autonomic nervous system, and it speaks to how well your body responds to stress. In a very basic breakdown and understanding, we have two profound stress states. We have fight or flight, or we have relaxation. States of sympathetic, which is fight or flight, or parasympathetic, which is relaxation. And of course, healing happens in parasympathetic states. We have to be in a relaxed state in order for healing to happen. When we're focusing and we're at school or at work and driving through traffic, that's where we're heavily in a sympathetic state. Fight or flight, ultimately being wary of danger and uh, um, anticipating our environment in order to be safe. Now, those mechanisms go heavily out of balance over our lifetime. And because the nature of our lifestyles is so stress oriented at this particular time in the human story, like think about it. We wake up early to get to work, we race against traffic, we come home, and then our relaxation is to, turn on the television and watch Die Hard with a flicker rate of 8,000 frames per second, patterning our brains into a very deregulated and stressful state as you're watching machine guns and buildings explode, your nervous system has a stress response to all of that as though it were there. It kind of tricks your nervous system. So that which we consider relaxation these days, a good majority of our population isn't in fact relaxing at all. And that's becoming more and more an epidemic all the time. So many of us on screens exposed to electromagnetic frequencies, and just the nature of life being so stressful at this point that the majority of us spend our times in a sympathetic dominant state, in a state of fight or flight. And of course, as we talked about earlier, healing and relaxation, sleep, all happen in parasympathetic states. So as does digestion. So let's just ask our audience here, do you know anybody with any digestive problems? Do you know anybody with any sleeping problems? Do you know anybody with any, sleeping and like any like emotional stress? Is that at all a thing for you? Do you know anybody that has stress in their lives? And of course, the answer to that question is obviously yes. And I would venture to say, more people experiencing even likely those two symptoms, upset indigestion or upset in their sleeping patterns, more than people without that.
Mm-hmm.
At this point. And so therein rests, the telltale sign that we exist in a high stress environment currently, and that we don't have many tools available to us in our culture, and have not ingrained those tools into our lifestyles in order to release and reduce that stress. So heart rate variability measures the effects of that stress on your body, how much energy there is in the body, how much sympathetic stress there is of that fight or flight, how much parasympathetic stress. And we can see all of these different electrical measures of, the brainwave speed. Are you heavily in theta or delta, which is an exhausted brainwave sleep because you're not sleeping and you're not recovering? We can see that. And we can see how much of the stress is in those respective brain waves, on and on. And so through heart rate variability, we have all of these foundational measures of stress and health, quite different than the biofeedback testing that we do, which allow us a very objective way of understanding the data. Solely the data of what's happening in the body, which is a lovely contrast to the biofeedback, which operates on a lot more nuance and subjective interpretation. And so it allows us the ability to quantify that which we're seeing, and to measure and see the rate of change and what's happening amidst those changes. And considering really what we're measuring is life through heart rate variability and the strength of life. It's an extraordinary pairing to, as you were saying, working with biofeedback or pulse electromagnetic therapy or laser therapy, or even something like the experience of going into a lake and coming out of it and measuring what's the effect of allowing myself to feel joy and go for a swim and decompress that way. What's the physiological effect on the body? And so how exciting that you've looked at doing that way. Very, very cool.
Yeah, I mean, I did it, pre and post psilocybin. I did it with the vaccine with my brother. What happened to him after, you could see it clearly in the HRV.
Yeah, well, that's a conversation we haven't had regarding your brother and his choices, but I'd be very curious to know what you saw, and we can perhaps discuss that at a later date, such to not make this too controversial. But I will say this: in the current times that we live in, we are being faced with a greater degree of stress than we have ever experienced, be it the stress of the emotional experience of what we went through and all of that craziness, and however you choose to interpret what happened there, why it happened there, what its purpose was, and where it's all going, in tandem with perhaps taking allowing an experimental medical treatment and what its effects have been on our bodies, short and long term. And so these technologies at this particular period of time, in my opinion, are imperative for what we have to get through for the amount of stress that has currently been caused. And I'll also say this, for anybody that's watching and paying attention, you know, I think it's pretty difficult at this point to not recognize the fact that there has been something obscure and some form of impropriety or something that is not in fact working as a benevolent force towards our well-being on planet Earth. And I think that's become apparent to many, and that many of the institutions which have been implemented and created as a means of safety and accountability, many of those institutions have been heavily compromised. Many of the paradigms of which we've had over the years have been heavily compromised.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we exist now in this time where you have to say, okay, so if many of the health authorities or all of the health authorities around the world are in fact not working towards our well-being, but in fact have perhaps other motivations, which could be, monetary gain and political influence and, whatever you believe to be the outcome, these structures which have long been created in paradigm in our minds to be staples, like that couldn't possibly happen, they would never allow that, they take care of us, the health, these are health agencies, etc. That's their job. And I think many people have come to realize, in fact, that these agencies are faulty, and that they're not operating based upon our common good and working towards that end, but in fact there's something else possibly happening, harboring and holding influence over these agencies which are supposed to be protecting and helping us. I think we exist currently in a place, in a paradigm, at a time within the story of us, which is going to have us reevaluate so much of what the false axioms that our society operates based upon. And moving into the future, I think we will see, it's always been interesting to me that, for 25 years of my career, it's been very difficult for me to take this technology or these technologies into the common, into the ability to, address and support, the population at large, and support that shift in understanding, whereby we embrace technology, new medicine, which is in fact old medicine actually, but where we embrace it and implement it as an equal part of the paradigm in our structure. In the past, that wasn't possible in light of the gatekeepers of many of these benevolent agencies, which we've been, dealing with for many, many years, as well as benevolent mindsets, that which is taught in the schools to the people whom would be looking after and caring for us is in fact quite flawed, and giving them a perspective which is also quite flawed as we approach, healthcare currently, with a degree of desensitization and a degree of contempt, really, for the people in need of service. And so there are a bunch of things that are about to change as the paradigm and the false axioms that people have operated on are coming to an end.
Yeah,
The beauty is we're embracing, we will be embracing the possibilities of exactly what we believe and what we work with and what we do, Lilia, in my opinion, and for all of you. And so it's an exciting time in medicine, in holistic wellness, because very, very soon, I believe the paradigm will shift. And so working with technologies, for example, like heart rate variability or dark field microscopes, which really allow us to see very objective data, right? It's not subjective, it's objective. We can very much see what's happening in the blood. There it is. It's right there. Through heart rate variability, this is your electrical signal, and this is how it breaks down. We
Yeah.
can very much see that. And to work with, whatever it is that we do, be it Reiki or
Yeah.
intentional healing, biofeedback, PEMF, laser therapy, light therapy, whatever we do, being able to demonstrate and show people the pre and post, the cause and effect of what it is that's happening is going to play a big role in shifting belief systems and in allowing people to embrace their responsibility, because that is the biggest part that's faulty in our medical system right now, is that it does not impart responsibility on the client or the patient to actively be a part of their healing process. Here, take this pill is no longer the paradigm that will work for us. We if we want something different, we simply have to change.
Yeah, absolutely. Very diplomatically put there, Adam. Thank you for that. Um, I think that, yeah, the shift is definitely on, and I'm absolutely agree. I think it's a very, very exciting time. We're in the process of doing a tour of Scotland right now. We've got a couple of festivals coming up. We're going to be showcasing all the technology. Stuart and Helen are going to be there and really get the word out, that there are other ways. So it is very exciting. And listen, I'm going to get you back on if you don't mind. I'm kind of realizing we've run about an hour, so but we've got so much more that I want to talk to you about. So if you would agree live on air to come back on, I can
Oh, of
get you
course.
back. And we can take this conversation further, because a big part of the Heal Scotland message is to actually educate people about what's available, so that if you ever got that diagnosis, or if you were really struggling and the drugs and the surgery didn't work, you're like, well, I could try this, so that we give people that understanding around the electromagnetic field and how these energy devices are picking up vital information that see us at that as a much more holistic energy system. And I think the response, I would love it if you could do what you want and rock up and take a pill. But I think most of us are understanding now that that is not the situation. We have to be part of it. And collectively, the more of us that get into it, the lighter the load will be and the more fun it will be. So thank
Yeah,
you.
you're most welcome. Big love to your audience. And what I'll say is, you know, having worked in this field now, as I've said, for 25 years, I thought we were in the thick of it 5 years ago when we were dealing with all of the issues of autoimmune disorders and,
Yeah,
the effects of all the different forms of toxicity affecting our food and water and air on planet Earth. I thought we were in the thick of it. And then, wow, like, because you have to remember, if you go back to the early 90s, we didn't really have fibromyalgia. We didn't really have the vast majority of autoimmune related illnesses, which are currently prevalent. We didn't have autism at the rates in which we have. And,
type
by
2 diabetes.
20, but yeah, by 2015, things were exponentially, like, looking not very, very good, like in the general wellness of the population. And of course, everything that's happened over the last 3 or 4 years now has taken it all to a new level. And having just completed an additional microscopy course recently and spent a lot of time under my microscope working with people whom have been in observation now for the last 30 years of blood, and they can see that which is aberrant and different and has never been that way before, and this is a change where they can see very clearly now. There has never been a more important time for people like us and within our fields to step up, step forward, and say, hey, there is in fact something better, something different, and the time is now.
Yeah, 100% the time is now. And on that note, thank you so much, Adam. And you have a great day. And I will
You
be
too.
in touch again really soon. Thank
Perfect.
you.
Thank you, Lilia. Bye,
Ciao.
everyone.